The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground of the Galactic Military Academy. Hundreds of cadets stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp and pressed for the graduation ceremony. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy as families and commanding officers filled the viewing stands. Commander Vexstar adjusted his dress uniform, feeling the familiar weight of his medals against his chest. 12 major campaigns, countless smaller operations, and 2 decades of service had earned him 43 decorations. The polished metal caught the sunlight as he walked along the reviewing line, inspecting the graduating cadets who would soon join the ranks of the Galactic Defense Force. Each species had its own traditions for military honors. The Altarians, like himself, wore their achievements proudly, believing that visible recognition inspired younger warriors. The crystalline Zephyrians embedded their awards directly into their skin, creating beautiful patterns that told the story of their service. Even the usually modest Carillions displayed their accomplishments through intricate tattoos that covered their arms. As Vexstar moved down the line, he noticed the usual mix of nervous excitement and pride on the young faces. Some cadets already wore ribbons for academic excellence or training achievements. Others displayed the basic service markers that showed they had completed their requirements. But when he reached the human section of the formation, something stopped him cold, standing. At perfect attention was a young human female, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture flawless, and her eyes stared straight ahead with the kind of focus that spoke of serious military training. But her chest was completely bare, no ribbons, no medals, no commendations of any kind. Not even the basic training completion badge that every cadet received. Vexstar frowned and continued his inspection, but his mind kept returning to the human cadet. In his experience, humans were fierce warriors with a strong sense of honor and achievement. Their military culture emphasized recognizing service and sacrifice. It seemed impossible that one of their cadets would reach graduation without earning a single decoration. The ceremony proceeded with the usual speeches and presentations. The Academy Commandant, a distinguished Carillion general, spoke about duty and service to the galaxy. Various species representatives offered their traditional blessings for the new officers. When the human ambassador took the podium, she spoke about the values of courage, sacrifice, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Vexstar found himself watching the human section during these speeches. The cadet with no medals never moved, never showed any emotion, just maintained that perfect military bearing. Her classmates occasionally glanced at her with what looked like respect, which only deepened the mystery. After the formal ceremony ended and families began to mingle with the new graduates, Vexstar made his way through the crowd. He had to satisfy his curiosity about the human cadet. Military protocol demanded that he approach her properly. Even though his rank gave him the authority to question any junior officer, he found her standing alone near the edge of the parade ground, watching as her classmates celebrated with their families. She noticed his approach and immediately came to attention, snapping off a perfect salute. "At ease, cadet," Vexstar said, returning the salute. "I am Commander Vexstar of the 3rd Altarian Fleet." "Cadet Kim Nari, sir," she replied, standing with her hands clasped behind her back. Her voice was steady and professional, showing no signs of nervousness despite facing a senior officer covered in battle honors. Vex single quotes. Tar studied her face for a moment. There was something in her eyes, a depth that seemed unusual for someone so young. Most cadets at graduation had the eager, untested look of people ready to prove themselves. This human had the calm gaze of someone who had already seen things that others had not. "Cadet Kim, I could not help but notice that your uniform lacks any decorations," Vexstar said carefully. "In my experience, human cadets are typically quite accomplished by graduation. Have you not participated in the standard training exercises and academic programs?" Kim Nari's expression did not change, but there was a slight pause before she answered. "I have completed all required training, sir." "Then, where are your awards? Your academic honors? Even your basic training completion badge?" Vexstar pressed, genuinely puzzled. The human cadet looked directly at him, and for a moment Vexstar saw something flicker in her eyes. It was not fear or embarrassment, but something else entirely. Something that reminded him of the look he had seen in the eyes of veterans who had fought in classified operations that they could never discuss. "Sir, I have participated in various training programs and exercises," Kimnari said slowly. "However, the operations I have been involved in were not the kind that receive public recognition." Vexstar felt his confusion deepen. "What do you mean by that, Cadet?" Kimnari glanced around the parade ground, then back at the commander. "Because the operations were not public, sir." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Vexstar had expected a straightforward explanation about administrative errors or perhaps cultural differences in how humans handled military decorations. Instead, he found himself facing something that sounded almost like a riddle. "I am not sure I understand," Vexstar said. "With respect, sir, that is probably for the best," Kimnari replied. Before Vexstar could ask for clarification, another human approached them. This one was male, also in cadet uniform, also with no visible decorations. He saluted both of them before speaking. "Cadet Park Day reporting, sir." "Nari, the transport is ready for departure." Kimnari nodded and turned back to Vexstar. "If you will excuse me, Commander, we have our assignments to report to." Vexstar watched as the two humans walked away together. Their movement was precise and coordinated in a way that spoke of extensive training together. As they reached the edge of the parade ground, they were joined by a third human, a female who also bore no decorations on her uniform. The commander stood there for several minutes, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed in all his years of service. He had never encountered anything quite like this. Military organizations were built on structure, hierarchy, and recognition of achievement. The idea that someone could complete military training without earning any recognition was almost incomprehensible. As the crowd began to thin and families departed with their newly graduated officers, Vexstar made his way back to the academy administrative building. Perhaps there had been some kind of error in the records. Maybe the human cadets were part of some special program that he was not familiar with, but even as he walked, Kimnari's words echoed in his mind. Because the operations were not public. What could that possibly mean? What kind of operations would a cadet be involved in that would not be public? And why would such operations not result in any kind of recognition or decoration? The more Vexstar thought about it, the more questions arose. If these humans had been involved in classified operations, why were they graduating with regular cadets? If they had not been involved in anything special, why the mysterious answer about non-public operations? By the time he reached his quarters that evening, Commander Vexstar had decided that he needed to learn more about these unusual human cadets. His curiosity had been thoroughly aroused, and his military instincts told him that there was much more to this story than appeared on the surface. As he prepared for sleep, Vexstar found himself wondering what secrets the human military might be keeping, and what role these seemingly unremarkable cadets played in something that was apparently too sensitive for public acknowledgement. The academy mess hall buzzed with conversation as officers and remaining cadets shared their evening meal. Commander Vexstar sat alone at a corner table, picking at his food while his mind remained focused on the mysterious human cadet from that morning. Kimnari's words kept replaying in his thoughts, each repetition making him more curious about what she had meant. Across the large dining room, he spotted two humans sitting together at a table near the windows. He recognized them as the cadets who had approached Kimnari after their conversation. Like her, their uniforms were completely free of any decorations or awards. This seemed even stranger now that he had time to think about it. Vexstar had served alongside humans in several campaigns over the years. They were known throughout the galaxy as fierce fighters with a strong sense of honor and duty. Human military culture placed great importance on recognizing courage and service. Their ceremonies for awarding medals were elaborate affairs that celebrated not just individual achievement, but the values their entire society held dear. So why would 3 human cadets graduate without a single ribbon between them? After finishing His meal, Vextar approached the table where the two humans sat. They looked up as he neared, and both immediately began to stand in respect for his rank. "Please, remain seated," Vextar said, gesturing for them to stay where they were. "I am Commander Vextar. I spoke with your colleague Kim Nari earlier today," the male human nodded. "Cadet Park Day, sir. This is Cadet Lee Su." He indicated. The female sitting across from him, Vextar pulled out a chair and sat down, studying both humans carefully. Like Kim Nari, they had that same unusual quality in their eyes. There was a calmness and awareness that seemed beyond their apparent age and experience. "I hope you do not mind my curiosity," Vextar began, "but I am puzzled by something. In all my years of service, I have never seen cadets graduate without any recognition for their training achievements. Yet the three of you seem to have completed your education without earning a single decoration." Park Day and Lee Su exchanged a quick glance before Park Day responded. "Sir, we have completed all the required programs and training exercises." "But surely you participated in war games, academic competitions, leadership exercises," Vextar pressed. "These activities normally result in some form of recognition." Lee Su spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. "We participated in various activities, Commander. However, not all training receives public acknowledgement." There was that word again, public. Vextar leaned forward slightly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The two humans looked at each other again, and Vextar could see some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Park Day spoke. "Sir, if you are truly curious about human training methods, you might want to research some of our recent military operations. Perhaps start with Operation Ghostwalk. Or perhaps do not," Lee Su added quietly. The comment sent a small chill down Vextar's spine. There was something in the way she said it that suggested looking into Operation Ghostwalk might lead to information he was not prepared for. "Is that a threat, Cadet?" Vextar asked, though his tone remained calm. "No, sir," Lee Su replied immediately. "It is simply advice. Some knowledge carries responsibilities that not everyone wishes to bear." Park Day nodded in agreement. "Commander, we respect your curiosity, but we cannot provide the answers you seek. Our situation is what it is for reasons that go beyond normal military protocol." Vextar studied both humans for a long moment. Their responses were respectful but firm, and he could sense that pushing further would not yield any additional information. However, they had given him a starting point for his investigation. "Very well," he said, standing from the table. "Thank you for your time." As he walked away, he heard Lee Su say quietly to her companion, "Do you think he will actually look into it?" "Probably," Park Day replied. "He has that look." That evening, Vextar made his way to the Academy's research center. As a senior officer, he had access to extensive military databases that contained information about operations across the galaxy. If Operation Ghostwalk was something significant, there should be records of it somewhere. The research center was nearly empty at this hour, with only a few dedicated students working on their final projects. Vextar settled at a terminal in a quiet corner and began his search. He started with the basic military operation database, searching for any reference to Ghostwalk. The search returned no results. He tried variations of the name but still found nothing. This was unusual, as most military operations were documented somewhere in the system. Even if the details were classified. Next, he searched for recent human military activities. This returned hundreds of results, but as he browsed through them, he began to notice a pattern that disturbed him. According to the official records, human involvement in recent galactic conflicts had been minimal. They appeared primarily in support roles, medical assistance, logistics support, humanitarian aid, but this did not match what Vextar knew from his own experience. Humans had a reputation as formidable warriors. Enemy species spoke of them with a mixture of fear and respect that came from direct combat experience. Yet the official record suggested they rarely engaged in actual fighting. Vextar expanded his search to include conflict reports from various sectors over the past 5 years. As he read through the documents, he began to notice another strange Pattern. Several major military victories had occurred shortly after humanitarian missions to the same areas, the Battle of Kepler Station, where Corellian forces had achieved an impossible victory against superior numbers, had taken place just 3 days after a human medical team had finished providing aid to Corellian civilians in that sector. The surrender of the rebel fleet at Proxima 7 had happened immediately after a human diplomatic mission had concluded negotiations for prisoner exchanges in the area. The mysterious collapse of the vegan pirate network had coincided with a human merchant convoy that had been delivering supplies to trade stations throughout that region. Each incident, viewed individually, could be explained as coincidence, but taken together, they suggested something far more complex than what appeared in the official reports. Vexstar leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen full of data. Either humans were incredibly lucky in their timing, or they were involved in activities that were not being recorded in the standard military databases. He thought about Kim Nari's words again. Because the operations were not public, could it be that humans were conducting military operations that were deliberately kept out of official records? And if so, why? The more Vexstar researched, the more questions arose. He found references to unknown Allied forces in several battle reports. There were mentions of enemy surrenders that happened for unclear reasons. Multiple commanders from different species had filed reports about receiving crucial intelligence from sources that could not be identified. As the night wore on, Vexstar became more convinced that there was a significant aspect of human military activity that was being deliberately concealed. But why would they hide their contributions to galactic security? Most species were proud to claim credit for their military achievements. When he finally left the research center in the early hours of the morning, Vexstar's mind was filled with new questions and theories. He had found no definitive answers, but he had discovered enough evidence to confirm that his initial suspicions were correct. The 3 human cadets with no decorations were connected to something much larger and more complex than a simple administrative oversight. As he walked through the empty corridors toward his quarters, Vexstar made a decision. He would continue his investigation, no matter where it led. The mystery of the humans with no medals had become something he needed to solve, both for his own understanding and because he sensed it might be important for the security of the entire galaxy. Commander Vexstar arrived at the Galactic Archives building before dawn, determined to use his high-level security clearance to access records that might not be available through normal channels. The massive structure housed the military and diplomatic records of dozens of species, with security protocols that reflected the sensitive nature of much of the information stored within. The night clerk, a methodical Corellian named Thesh, processed Vexstar's credentials without question. As a decorated commander with level 7 clearance, Vexstar had access to classified materials that most officers would never see. He hoped this would be enough to uncover the truth about the mysterious human operations, settling into a secure terminal in the restricted access section. Vexstar began his search with a more systematic approach than his previous evening's investigation. He started by looking for any operations that had involved humans but were not listed in the standard military databases. What he found made him increasingly uncomfortable. There were gaps in the records. Not obvious deletions or redacted sections, but subtle absences that only became apparent when he cross-referenced multiple databases. For example, the official timeline for the Kepler Station conflict showed Corellian forces engaging the enemy on day 1, followed by 3 days of intense fighting, and then a sudden victory on day 5. But when Vexstar examined the supply requisitions for that period, he found orders for medical equipment that far exceeded what the Corellian force would have needed for their reported casualties. More disturbing were the timestamps. Communications logs showed encrypted transmissions being sent and received during periods when no official operations were taking place. Fleet movement records indicated ships arriving and departing from sectors where no missions were scheduled. Vexstar spent hours piecing together these inconsistencies, and slowly a pattern began to emerge. In conflict after conflict, there were signs that something had happened that was not being officially recorded. And in every case humans had been present in the area just before the unexplained events occurred. By midday, Vexstar had compiled a list of over 30 incidents where this pattern appeared. The scope of what he was uncovering was staggering. If his suspicions were correct, humans had been involved in secret operations across multiple sectors for at least the past 5 years. He decided to test his theory by interviewing other officers who had been present during some of these conflicts. His first stop was the officers' club at the nearby military base, where he knew he could find veterans from various species who might have first-hand knowledge of the events he was investigating. Colonel Drex, a veteran Zephyrian tank commander, was nursing a drink at the bar when Vexstar approached. Drex had led armor units during the Battle of Kepler Station, and his official report had praised the unexpected tactical advantages that had led to their victory. "Drex, I am researching the Kepler Station operation for a tactical analysis," Vexstar said, taking the seat next to him. "Your report mentioned unexpected advantages. Can you elaborate on what happened?" The crystalline officer's surface flickered, which Vexstar recognized as a sign of confusion or uncertainty. "It was the strangest thing, Commander. We were outnumbered 3-1, and the enemy had superior positioning. By all logical analysis, we should have been defeated." But you won decisively," Vexstar observed. "Yes, but not through anything we did," Drex replied. On the third day of fighting, the enemy's communications suddenly became chaotic. Their supply lines were disrupted, their command structure seemed to collapse, and their morale plummeted. By the time we launched our final assault, they were already in retreat. Do you have any idea what caused this change? Drex's surface flickered again. There were rumors among the troops. Some claimed they had seen soldiers moving through the enemy lines at night, but our reconnaissance showed no such activity. Others insisted that key enemy officers had been eliminated, but we found no evidence of assassinations. Vexstar leaned forward. "What do you think happened?" "Honestly, I think someone else was fighting that battle alongside us, but they left no trace of their presence. My gut feeling is that we were not alone out there, but I have no proof." Similar conversations with other veterans yielded comparable stories. At Proxima 7, Admiral Korthak described enemy forces that had surrendered for reasons that made no tactical sense. At the Vega colony incident, Captain Yilthus spoke of pirate leaders who had been found dead in circumstances that suggested professional elimination, though no military unit had been in the area. Each officer Vexstar interviewed expressed the same puzzlement about their victories. They had won battles they should have lost, often through the collapse or elimination of enemy leadership at crucial moments. But none could explain how these advantages had materialized. As the afternoon wore on, Vexstar began to hear whispered references to ghost soldiers and phantom operations. The stories were always secondhand, told by someone who had heard from someone else about mysterious figures who appeared and disappeared without leaving official records of their presence. His most enlightening conversation came with General Morthek, a grizzled Altarian veteran who had fought in more conflicts than most officers would see in 3 lifetimes. When Vexstar mentioned his research into unexplained tactical advantages, the old general's eyes narrowed with recognition. "You are asking about the shadows," Morthek said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "The shadows? That is what some of us call them. Forces that fight battles we never see, win victories we never hear about, and solve problems we never knew existed." Morthek paused to take a drink. "I have been in this business for 40 years, Commander, and I have learned to recognize when there are players on the board that I cannot see." "Are you suggesting there is some kind of secret military force operating independently?" Morthek shrugged. "I am suggesting that the galaxy is more peaceful than it should be, given the number of potential conflicts that arise each year. Either we are all incredibly lucky, or someone is working very hard to prevent wars before they can start." "And, you think this someone might be human?" "I think humans are involved in more than they admit," the general replied carefully. "But I also think that asking too many questions about it might not be wise. Some secrets exist for good reasons." That Evening, Vextar returned to his quarters with his mind churning. The pattern he had discovered was becoming clearer with each piece of evidence he uncovered. Humans were involved in extensive covert operations that were preventing conflicts and ending wars through methods that left no official traces, but this revelation only raised more questions. Why would humans choose to operate in secret when they could gain significant political and military advantages by claiming credit for their successes? What was the purpose of maintaining this elaborate deception? And what role did cadets like Kim Nari play in these shadow operations? As he prepared his notes from the day's research, Vextar realized that he was investigating something far more complex and significant than he had initially suspected. The three cadets with no medals were not anomalies or administrative errors. They were part of a carefully constructed system that was actively shaping galactic politics while remaining completely invisible to official scrutiny. The next morning brought an unexpected development. As Vextar was reviewing his research files, his door chimed to announce a visitor. When he opened it, he found himself facing a human woman in the uniform of the diplomatic corps. Her bearing was professional, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him strongly of the three cadets he had encountered. "Commander Vextar," she said with a slight bow, "I am Captain Yoon Hae of the Human Diplomatic Corps. I understand you have been conducting research into certain aspects of recent galactic military history." Vextar felt a chill run down his spine. His investigation had apparently not gone unnoticed. "Captain Yoon Hae," he replied formally. "How may I assist you?" She smiled, but it was not entirely friendly. "Perhaps we could have a conversation about your research interests." "I believe I might be able to provide some context that would be helpful to your understanding." As Vextar invited her into his quarters, he realized that his investigation had reached a turning point. He was no longer simply uncovering information about hidden operations. He had attracted the attention of the people who were running them. Captain Yoon Hae entered Vextar's quarters with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being in control of any situation. She carried a sealed briefcase and wore the expression of a diplomat, but her movements had the precision of a trained soldier. Vextar gestured toward the small conference table near the window, and they both took seats facing each other. "Commander," she began without preamble, "your investigation into certain patterns in recent military operations has been noted by my superiors. We find ourselves in the unusual position of needing to provide you with information that we normally prefer to keep confidential." Vextar maintained his composure, though internally he was both excited and apprehensive about what he was about to learn. "I am simply trying to understand some inconsistencies I have observed in official records." "Inconsistencies?" Yoon Hae smiled slightly. "That is one way to describe them. Tell me, Commander, what conclusions have you drawn from your research?" "I believe that human military forces have been involved in operations that are not being reported through normal channels," Vextar said carefully. "These operations appear to have significantly influenced the outcomes of several conflicts, but there is no official record of human participation." Yoon Hae nodded approvingly. "An accurate assessment as far as it goes, but you are missing the larger picture." She placed her briefcase on the table and activated a security field that would prevent their conversation from being monitored. "What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. Your security clearance technically gives you access to this information, but very few people outside the human command structure have ever seen it." She opened the briefcase and removed a datapad containing heavily redacted files. As she handed it to Vextar, she continued speaking. "For the past 8 years, the Human Special Operations Command has been conducting what we call resolution operations throughout the galaxy. These are missions designed to prevent conflicts from escalating into full-scale wars that could destabilize entire sectors." Vextar began scrolling through the files on the pad. Even with the heavy redactions, the scope of what he was seeing was breathtaking. Operation listings included dozens of missions across multiple star systems, involving teams of specialists trained in everything from infiltration and sabotage to psychological warfare and economic manipulation. These operations, he said slowly, they are designed to end conflicts before they begin? Exactly. While other species respond to threats with conventional military force, we have developed a doctrine based on prevention and subtle intervention. Why fight a war when you can eliminate the conditions that make war inevitable? Yunhei reached across and tapped the datapad, bringing up a specific file. Look at Operation Silent Thunder. 3 months ago, intelligence indicated that the Vegan Trade Federation was planning to launch a preemptive strike against the Carillion mining colonies. Traditional military response would have been to deploy fleets to protect the colonies and prepare for battle. Vexstar read through the operation summary. Instead of military deployment, a small team of human operatives had infiltrated the vegan leadership structure. Within 2 weeks, the war plans had been abandoned due to what appeared to be internal political struggles and economic concerns. How did you accomplish this? He asked, by studying the real motivations behind the planned attack. The vegan leadership was not acting out of genuine strategic concerns, but because certain influential figures stood to profit from military contracts. Our team identified these individuals and created situations that made war economically disadvantageous for them personally. And the vegans never knew they were being manipulated. The best operations are the ones where the targets solve their own problems. We simply provided the right information at the right time to help them reach the conclusions we wanted them to reach. Yunhei brought up another file. Operation Phantom Diplomat involved preventing a 3-way conflict between the Altarian Commonwealth, the Zephyrian Collective, and the independent worlds of the Tau sector. Traditional diplomacy had failed, and military planners on all sides were preparing for war. The file showed that human operatives had discovered that all 3 sides were being manipulated by weapons dealers who stood to profit from an extended conflict. Instead of exposing this directly, the operatives had arranged for each side to independently discover evidence of the manipulation, leading them to cooperate against the common threat. The 3 governments now have a mutual defense pact and have established joint trade agreements, Yunhei explained. What could have been a devastating war became the foundation for lasting peace. Vexstar looked up from the datapad. This explains the pattern I observed, but it raises new questions. Why do you operate in secret? These achievements could bring significant prestige and political advantages to humanity. Yunhei's expression became more serious. Because the moment we claim credit for these operations, they become impossible to repeat. Our effectiveness depends entirely on other species not knowing what we are doing. If the galaxy understood that humans were actively manipulating political and military situations, we would be seen as a threat rather than an ally. She took the datapad back and brought up a new section of files. This brings us to your original question about Cadet Kim Nari and her lack of decorations. Vexstar felt his pulse quicken as he recognized the implications of what she was saying. Kim Nari is not actually a cadet, Yunhei continued. She is Agent Kim Nari, a veteran of 17. Resolution operations across 8 star systems. Her classmates Park Day and Lee Su are also experienced operatives. They were attending the Academy graduation ceremony as part of their cover identities. The datapad displayed service records that told a very different story from what Vexstar had assumed. Kim Nari had been involved in operations that prevented conflicts in the Centauri sector, eliminated a terrorist cell in the Vega system, and helped negotiate the peaceful resolution of a colonial uprising in the Tau Ceti region. She has saved more lives and prevented more suffering than most generals achieve in their entire careers, Yunhei said. But she can never receive recognition for any of it, because acknowledging her service would compromise ongoing operations and expose methods that we need to keep secret. Vexstar felt a mixture of admiration and sadness as he processed this information. So when she said the operations were not public ... she was giving you the only answer she could give. The truth, but in a form that protected operational security. Hey closed the datapad and leaned back in her chair. Commander, you have stumbled onto something that very few people outside the human command structure know about. We are telling you this because your investigation was thorough enough that you would have eventually uncovered more than we could allow to become public knowledge. What do you expect me to do with this information? Nothing. File your report about inconsistencies in military records as a minor administrative matter and move on to other duties. The galaxy is safer because of operations that must remain secret, and heroes like Kim Nari must remain unrecognized for the greater good. Vexstar sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what he had learned. The mysterious patterns he had discovered were the visible traces of a vast, coordinated effort to maintain galactic peace through methods that could never be officially acknowledged. "Captain," he finally said, "I understand the need for secrecy, but does anyone else know about this? Other species leadership? The Galactic Council?" Yunhei shook her head. "A very small number of individuals in key positions are aware that humans engage in activities beyond what we officially report, but they do not know the specifics. The success of this program depends on maintaining the illusion that peace happens naturally, through diplomacy and good fortune." As she prepared to leave, Yunhei paused at the door. "Commander, I hope you understand that you now carry a significant responsibility. The knowledge you possess could destabilize the very peace that people like Kim Nari work so hard to maintain." After she left, Vexstar sat alone with his thoughts. He finally understood why Kim Nari had no medals and why that bare uniform represented more honor and sacrifice than all of his own decorations combined. She and her colleagues carried the burden of protecting the galaxy while accepting that their greatest achievements would forever remain invisible. 3 days after his conversation with Captain Yunhei, Vexstar received a message requesting his presence at a secure facility outside the Academy grounds. The coordinates led him to an unremarkable building that appeared to be a standard military research center, but the security protocols he encountered suggested something far more significant. After passing through multiple checkpoints and identity verifications, Vexstar was escorted to a windowless briefing room deep within the facility. Captain Yunhei was waiting for him, along with 2 other humans he did not recognize. The room contained a large holographic projector and several secure terminals. "Commander," Yunhei greeted him, "thank you for coming. My superiors have decided that since you have already been exposed to classified information about our operations, it would be beneficial for you to understand our methods more completely." She gestured to her companions. "This is Colonel Min Wu, Director of Tactical Operations, and Major Hana Jin, our Chief Analyst for Psychological Warfare." Colonel Min Wu stepped forward, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian clothing. "Commander Vexstar, what you are about to see represents decades of development in what we call shadow doctrine. Please understand that this information is shared with very few individuals outside our organization." The holographic projector activated, displaying a 3-dimensional map of a star system that Vexstar recognized as the location of a recent conflict. Red indicators showed the positions of opposing military forces, while blue markers indicated civilian populations and strategic resources. "This is the Rigel sector during the mineral rights dispute between the Carillion Mining Guild and the independent traders," Colonel Min Wu explained. Conventional wisdom suggested that this would escalate into a shooting war within weeks. Both sides had legitimate grievances, significant military assets, and popular support for aggressive action. Major Hana Jin manipulated the display, highlighting specific locations and personnel. "Our analysis indicated that the conflict was being artificially escalated by a cartel of weapons dealers, who stood to profit from an extended war. However, simply exposing this information would not have been sufficient to prevent hostilities." "Why not?" Vexstar asked. "Because both sides had already invested too much political capital in their positions to back down gracefully," she replied. "Public exposure of the manipulation would have been seen as an attempt by one side to gain advantage over the other. The war would have proceeded despite the revelation." Colonel Min Wu took over the briefing. "Instead, we implemented what we call a cascade strategy, rather than confronting the problem directly. We created a series of seemingly unrelated events that gave both sides face-saving reasons to step back from conflict. The holographic display showed a timeline of events over a 3-week period. Vextar watched as various incidents occurred throughout the sector: equipment failures, personnel transfers, economic fluctuations, and communication breakdowns. Agent Cho Wan infiltrated the weapons cartel, not to destroy it but to redirect its activities, Colonel Min Woo explained. By feeding false information about market conditions and military procurement plans, she convinced the cartel that their profits would be maximized by supplying defensive systems rather than offensive weapons. The display showed how this change had affected the calculations of both sides in the dispute. With defensive systems readily available but offensive weapons becoming scarce and expensive, the military balance shifted in favor of protective rather than aggressive strategies. Simultaneously, Major Hanajin continued, we arranged for both sides to independently discover evidence of previously unknown mineral deposits in neutral territory. This gave them an alternative focus for their economic ambitions that did not require conflict with each other. Vextar studied the timeline carefully. How did you arrange for them to discover these deposits? The deposits were real, but they had been overlooked due to outdated survey techniques, she replied. We simply provided updated sensor data to prospecting teams from both sides, allowing them to make the discoveries naturally. The result, Colonel Minwoo concluded, was a negotiated agreement to jointly develop the new mineral sites, with the weapons cartel shifting to supply defensive systems for the mining operations. What could have been a devastating war became a profitable partnership. Vextar was impressed by the complexity and subtlety of the operation. But surely this required extensive resources and planning. Less than you might think, Captain Yoon. He said, one of the key principles of Shadow Doctrine is that small interventions at critical points can produce enormous effects. We do not try to control events directly. Instead, we influence the conditions that shape how people make decisions. The holographic display changed to show another operation, this one in a sector that Vextar recognized from his earlier research. Operation Nightfall involved preventing a 3-way conflict between the Altarian Commonwealth, the Zephyrian Collective, and several independent systems, Major Hanajin explained. I read about this in the files Captain Yoon-hei showed me, Vextar said. You discovered that all 3 sides were being manipulated by a 4th party. Correct, but the challenge was not just identifying the manipulation, but ensuring that all 3 sides discovered it in a way that led to cooperation rather than increased suspicion of each other. The display showed the complex web of relationships and influences that the human operatives had to navigate. Agent Han Sol spent 6 months establishing herself as a trade representative with access to all 3 governments. Her cover allowed her to observe the manipulation directly and to identify the specific individuals who were facilitating it. Colonel Minwoo highlighted several key figures on the display. Rather than exposing the conspiracy directly, Agent Han Sol arranged for each government to independently discover evidence of the manipulation through their own intelligence networks. She carefully planted information where it would be found by each side's security services. The critical element, Major Hanajin added, was ensuring that each discovery appeared to be the result of the government's own investigative work. This gave all 3 sides ownership of the intelligence and made them more likely to act on it. Vextar watched as the timeline showed how the 3 governments had separately uncovered the plot, then gradually shared their findings with each other. They ended up cooperating against the common threat because they each felt they had contributed to solving the problem. Exactly, Captain Yoon-hei confirmed. People are more likely to accept solutions they feel they have helped create. By allowing each government to feel that they had played a crucial role in uncovering the conspiracy, we ensured their commitment to the cooperative response. The holographic display shifted again, this time showing a much larger and more complex operation involving multiple star systems and dozens of different factions. Operation Deep Current was our most ambitious resolution to date, Colonel Minwoo said. It involved preventing what our analysts predicted would become a galaxy-spanning war. Vextar leaned forward, studying the intricate web of relationships and conflicts displayed before him. What was the scope of this operation? Major Hannah Jin manipulated the controls, highlighting different aspects of the situation. Economic analysis indicated that several major trade disruptions would occur simultaneously, creating shortages that would force various species into conflict over essential resources. Traditional responses would have involved military escorts for trade convoys and defensive alliances that would have escalated tensions. Instead, Colonel Minwoo continued, we implemented a comprehensive strategy that addressed the root causes of the potential shortages while creating new economic opportunities that made cooperation more profitable than conflict. The display showed how human operatives had worked across multiple sectors to establish alternative trade routes, introduce new technologies that reduced resource consumption, and facilitate joint ventures between species that had previously been rivals. The operation took 2 years to complete and involved over 200 agents, Captain Yoon-hae said. But the result was a period of unprecedented economic growth and cooperation that continues to benefit all species involved. As the briefing concluded, Vextar found himself struggling to process the magnitude of what he had learned. The human approach to maintaining galactic peace was far more sophisticated and comprehensive than anything he had imagined. Commander, Colonel Minwoo said as they prepared to leave, you now understand why people like Kim Nari can never receive public recognition for their service. The moment our methods become known, they become impossible to use effectively. Vextar nodded slowly. I understand. But it must be difficult for these agents to serve without acknowledgement. It is, Captain Yoon-hae admitted. But they understand that their sacrifice ensures that millions of people across the galaxy can live in peace. That knowledge has to be reward enough. A week after the comprehensive briefing, Captain Yoon-hae contacted Vextar with an unusual request. She asked him to accompany her on what she described as a field visit. That would help him understand the full scope of the Shadow Operations program. They traveled to coordinates in deep space, far from any established shipping lanes or military installations. Their destination was a ship that did not appear in any official registry. From the outside, it looked like a standard research vessel. But as they approached the docking bay, Vextar could see modifications that suggested far more sophisticated capabilities than any civilian craft would require. Welcome to the Remembrance, Captain Yoon-hae said as they disembarked. This is our mobile coordination center for deep space operations, but it also serves another important purpose. The ship's interior was a mixture of high-tech operations centers and something that felt more like a memorial. As they moved through the corridors, Vextar noticed that the walls were lined with photographs and small personal mementos. Each display included a name, dates, and a brief description of service. Agent Kim Jin, Yoon-hae said, stopping beside one of the memorials. Killed during Operation Silent Watch while preventing a terrorist attack on a civilian transport. His sacrifice saved over 3,000 lives, but his death was officially attributed to a training accident. She moved to another display. Agent Park Min, lost during Operation Deep Strike when her cover was compromised while infiltrating a weapons smuggling ring. She transmitted crucial intelligence before her position was overrun, allowing us to shut down a network that was supplying arms to 12 different conflict zones. Vextar studied the photographs, noting that many of the faces looked incredibly young. How many? He asked quietly. Over 800 in the past 10 years, Yoon-hae replied. Every one of them knew that their deaths would never be publicly acknowledged, that their families would be told they died in training accidents or equipment failures. They accepted that burden because they understood the importance of the work. They continued through the ship, and Vextar saw that entire sections were dedicated to honoring agents who had given their lives for operations that would never appear in any official history. The weight of their sacrifice was overwhelming. Agent Lee Yeon, Yoon-hae said, stopping at another memorial. She died preventing a plague weapon from being deployed against the civilian population. The official record shows that the weapon was destroyed in a laboratory accident, with no mention of her infiltration mission or the fact that she manually triggered the containment protocols knowing it would kill her. Vexstar found himself thinking about the three cadets he had met at the graduation ceremony. Himnari and her colleagues, they know about all of this? They have attended memorial services for fallen comrades whose sacrifices they can never discuss with anyone outside the organization, Yunhei confirmed. Imagine carrying the grief of losing friends and teammates, but being unable to share that grief with family members or seek support from anyone who does not have the same clearance level. They entered a large chamber that served as the ship's main memorial hall. The walls were covered with names, thousands of them, representing agents who had served in operations that officially never happened. At the center of the room was a simple black stone with an inscription, "In memory of those who served in silence, died in shadow, and saved lives that will never know their names. This is the true cost of shadow doctrine," Yunhei said. Not just the operational expenses or the political risks, but the human cost of maintaining operations that cannot be acknowledged. Vexstar walked slowly around the memorial, reading names and trying to comprehend the scope of the sacrifice these people had made. Why do they do it? Why do people like Kimnari accept these conditions? Because someone has to, a new voice said from behind them. Vexstar turned to see Kimnari herself entering the memorial hall, still dressed in her cadet uniform but now carrying herself with the bearing of the experienced operative she actually was. "Agent Kim," Yunhei acknowledged. "I thought you were en route to your next assignment." "I am, but I wanted to pay my respects before departure," Kimnari replied. She approached one of the memorials, a young man whose photograph showed him smiling in what appeared to be a candid moment. "Agent Ju Hyun," she said quietly. "My partner during my first 3 operations. He was killed during Operation Quiet Storm when we were extracting a scientist who had been developing biological weapons for a terrorist organization." Vexstar watched as Kimnari placed a small flower beside the photograph. The official story was that he died in a transport accident. While returning from a routine diplomatic mission, his family never knew that he died, saving millions of lives by ensuring that those weapons could never be completed. She turned to face Vexstar directly. "You ask Captain Yunhei why we do this. The answer is simple, because if we do not, who will? Traditional military forces are excellent at fighting wars, but they cannot prevent the conditions that make wars inevitable. Diplomats can negotiate agreements, but they cannot address the underlying motivations that lead to conflict." Kimnari gestured toward the memorial walls. "Every person honored here died preventing a war, stopping a terrorist attack, or eliminating a threat that could have killed thousands or millions of innocent people. They died so that families across the galaxy could live in peace without ever knowing they were in danger. But the cost to the agents themselves," Vexstar said. "The isolation, the inability to share their experiences, the knowledge that their sacrifices will never be recognized, is the price we pay for effectiveness," Kimnari finished. "The moment our operations become public knowledge, our ability to conduct future operations is compromised. Enemy organizations would adapt their methods, target our agents, and develop countermeasures against our techniques." Captain Yunhei joined the conversation. "Commander, you have seen our operational methods and our success rate. But you also need to understand the personal cost that effectiveness requires. Agents like Kimnari carry burdens that no military honor or public recognition could balance." Kimnari nodded. "I have watched teammates die in my arms, knowing that. I could never tell their families how brave they were or how important their sacrifice was to galactic security. I have prevented conflicts that would have killed millions, but I can never share that knowledge with anyone who might take comfort in knowing that such threats were eliminated." She paused beside another memorial, this one showing a young woman with determined eyes. "Agent Sung Min was my roommate during training. She died during Operation Final Hour, preventing a group of extremists from destroying a space station with 40,000 civilians aboard. Her parents still think she died in a routine training exercise." Vexstar felt the weight of what these agents endured settling on his shoulders. "How do you handle the isolation?" "We support each other," Kimnari replied simply. The agents who serve in shadow operations form bonds that civilians cannot understand. We share experiences that we can never discuss with anyone else, and we rely on each other for the emotional support that our families cannot provide because they do not know what we actually do. As they prepared to leave the memorial hall, Nari turned back to Vexstar one final time. "Commander, you now know why my uniform bears no decorations. Every medal on that wall represents someone who died performing actions that were far more heroic than anything that normally earns official recognition. My bare uniform is not a sign of failure or oversight. It is a symbol of service that transcends." Public acknowledgement. Captain Yoon-hae escorted Vexstar back to their transport, leaving Nari alone with her memories and her grief. As they departed the remembrance, Vexstar found himself fundamentally changed by what he had witnessed. "Captain," he said quietly, "I finally understand what Nari meant when she said the operations were not public. It was not just about operational security, it was about carrying a burden that the public can never be allowed to know exists." "That is correct," Yoon-hae replied. "And now you carry a small part of that burden as well. You know about sacrifices that can never be publicly honored, about heroes whose names will never be spoken in official ceremonies, and about victories that must forever be attributed to luck or natural circumstances." As they traveled back toward the academy, Vexstar realized that his simple question about medals had led him into a world where the greatest honors were the ones that could never be displayed, and the greatest heroes were the ones whose names would never be known. The revelation about the remembrance and the true cost of shadow operations haunted Vexstar for days. He found himself unable to focus on his regular duties, constantly thinking about the agents who sacrificed everything for a galaxy that would never know their names. His perspective on military service, honor, and sacrifice had been fundamentally altered by what he had learned. Unable to sleep one morning, Vexstar decided to take a walk around the academy grounds before dawn. The quiet campus allowed him to think without distraction, and he found himself drawn to the training areas where cadets practiced their combat skills. As he approached the main exercise field, he was surprised to see a lone figure moving through what appeared to be advanced combat forms. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, he recognized Nari immediately. Her movements were fluid and precise, displaying a level of skill that was far beyond what any cadet should possess. Every technique she demonstrated was refined by real combat experience, and her training routine included maneuvers that were clearly designed for infiltration and close-quarters combat rather than conventional military engagement. Vexstar watched from a distance, finally understanding that everything about Nari's behavior made sense when viewed through the lens of her true identity. Her calm demeanor, her careful responses to questions, her apparent comfort with authority figures, all of these traits were the result of years of operational experience rather than natural confidence. As Nari completed her training routine, she noticed Vexstar observing from the edge of the field. She approached him without the deference that a real cadet would show to a senior officer, confirming once again that her role as a student was entirely fictional. "Commander," she said with a slight nod, "you are awake early." "I could not sleep," Vexstar replied honestly. "I have been thinking about our conversation at the Remembrance, and about everything I have learned over the past weeks." Nari gestured toward a bench near the training area, and they sat together as the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon. "It is difficult to process at first," she said. "Most people cannot imagine making the sacrifices that shadow operations require." "I keep thinking about the question I asked you at graduation," Vexstar said, "about why you had no medals. At the time, I thought I was asking about an administrative oversight or perhaps a cultural difference I did not understand. And now I realize I was asking about something far more significant. Your bare uniform represents a level of service and sacrifice that makes all of my decorations seem insignificant by comparison." Nari was quiet for a moment, watching as the sky gradually lightened. "Commander, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "How many lives have you saved through your military service?" Vexstar considered the question carefully. I have commanded ships and units in various conflicts. I suppose thousands of civilians have been protected by operations I participated in, though it is difficult to calculate an exact number. And how many wars have you prevented? Prevented? Vexstar was puzzled by the question. Military forces respond to conflicts. They do not typically prevent them from occurring. Exactly, Kimnari said. Traditional military doctrine focuses on winning wars that have already begun. Shadow doctrine focuses on ensuring that wars never start at all. The lives we save are not just the soldiers who would die in battle, but all the civilians who would suffer from conflicts that never happen. She stood and began walking slowly around the training field, with Vexstar following beside her. During my 17 operations, I have prevented conflicts that our analysts estimated would have resulted in over 2 million casualties, but those people will never know they were in danger, and I can never tell them that their safety required the sacrifice of people like Agent Ju Hyan. How do you carry that knowledge? Vexstar asked. How do you live with knowing that your greatest achievements can never be acknowledged? Kimnari stopped walking and turned to face him directly. By understanding that acknowledgement is not why we serve. Glory belongs to people who need external validation for their actions. Recognition belongs to those who want others to know what they have accomplished. We serve because the work needs to be done, not because we want credit for doing it. As they resumed walking, Kimnari continued her explanation. Commander, during your decorated career, you have participated in several operations that you remember as significant victories. But I suspect you were never told about the preliminary operations that made those victories possible. Vexstar felt a chill as he realized what she was suggesting. Are you saying that some of my successes were only possible because of shadow operations? The Battle of Kepler Station, where you served as tactical officer aboard the flagship, Kimnari said. Do you remember how the enemy forces seemed to lose coordination during the crucial phase of the engagement? Vexstar nodded slowly. He had always wondered about the enemy's sudden tactical confusion during what should have been their strongest assault. Their communications became chaotic, and their command structure seemed to collapse without explanation. Agent Park Min. And I spent 3 weeks infiltrating their communication networks and command facilities, Kimnari revealed. We introduced subtle delays and misinformation that created the coordination failures you observed. Your tactical brilliance was real, but it was only effective because we had created the conditions that allowed it to succeed. The revelation hit Vexstar like a physical blow. One of the victories he was most proud of, a battle that had earned him his first major decoration, had been made possible by operations he never knew occurred. The Proxima 7 incident, Kimnari continued, where you led the diplomatic escort that successfully negotiated the rebel surrender. Did you ever wonder why the rebel leadership suddenly became willing to negotiate after months of refusing all diplomatic contact? Vexstar remembered the operation clearly. The rebel leaders had inexplicably agreed to peace talks just hours before he arrived in the system. You eliminated their extremist advisors, he said, understanding immediately. Agent Lee Su identified 3 key figures who were pushing the rebels toward continued resistance for personal profit. We arranged for their removal in ways that appeared to be the result of internal power struggles. Without their influence, the moderate rebel leaders were free to accept the reasonable terms your diplomatic team offered. They had completed their circuit of the training field and returned to the bench where they had started. Vexstar sat down heavily, trying to process the implications of what he had learned. 3 times during my career, he said slowly, my most significant achievements were only possible because of shadow operations. And you were never supposed to know that, Kimnari replied. The point of shadow doctrine is that conventional forces should be able to operate effectively without being aware of our interventions. Your tactical skills and diplomatic abilities were real. We simply created conditions that allowed them to be successful. But does not that diminish the value of conventional military service? Kimnari shook her head firmly. Not at all. Shadow operations can create opportunities and eliminate obstacles. but we cannot replace the courage and skill required to execute conventional military operations. You and your colleagues still had to make the right decisions and take the necessary risks to achieve victory. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, Kimnari prepared to leave for her next assignment. Before departing, she turned to Vexstar with a final observation. Commander, you asked me why I accept service without recognition. The answer is that recognition from the people whose lives we save is impossible because they must never know they were in danger. Recognition from our peers is limited because so few people can ever know what we do. But there is one form of recognition that matters more than any medal or decoration. What is that? The knowledge that the galaxy is more peaceful because of our work. Every day that passes without a major conflict. Every diplomatic success that prevents bloodshed. Every peaceful resolution to a potential crisis. These are the recognition we seek. The peace itself is our reward. As Kimnari walked away, heading toward whatever dangerous assignment awaited her next, Vexstar realized that he finally understood the true nature of heroism. It was not about glory or recognition, but about the willingness to sacrifice everything, including the acknowledgement of one's sacrifice, for the greater good. Sitting alone on the bench as the academy began to come alive with the morning's activities, Vexstar reflected on how profoundly his understanding of military service had changed. The medals on his chest would never again seem as important as the knowledge that true heroes served in shadows, asking for nothing more than the opportunity to protect others. 1 year had passed since Commander Vexstar first encountered Kimnari at the graduation ceremony. The academy was once again preparing for its annual graduation, and Vexstar found himself assigned to the same reviewing duties he had performed the previous year. As he prepared his dress uniform and adjusted his medals, he reflected on how much his understanding of military service had changed. The past year had been transformative for Vexstar. Armed with knowledge of shadow operations, he had begun to see patterns everywhere. News reports of conflicts that ended unexpectedly, diplomatic breakthroughs that seemed to come from nowhere, and terrorist threats that simply vanished without explanation all took on new meaning. He realized that the galaxy was far more dangerous than most people knew, but also far safer because of the work being done by agents whose names would never appear in history books. As he walked across the parade ground toward the formation of graduating cadets, Vexstar carried himself differently than he had the year before. His medals still caught the sunlight, but they no longer seemed as important to him. He had learned that the most significant military achievements were often the ones that could never be publicly acknowledged. The graduation ceremony proceeded, much as it had the previous year, with speeches about duty, honor, and service to the galaxy. But as Vexstar listened to the familiar words, he heard deeper meanings that he had missed before. When the Academy Commandant spoke about protecting those who could not protect themselves, Vexstar thought about agents who gave their lives to prevent wars that the protected would never know had threatened them. When the human ambassador spoke about sacrifice and courage, Vexstar understood that her words carried special meaning for the shadow operatives, who might be sitting among the graduating cadets, maintaining their cover identities while preparing for assignments that would never be officially recorded. As he began his inspection of the formation, Vexstar found himself looking more carefully at the human cadets. Most wore the standard decorations for academic achievement and training completion, but when he reached one particular section, he saw something that immediately caught his attention. Standing at perfect attention was a young human male, his uniform immaculate and his bearing flawless. But like Kimnari the year before, his chest was completely bare of any decorations. The sight sent a familiar chill through Vexstar as he realized he was looking at another shadow operative maintaining a cover identity. After the ceremony concluded, Vexstar made his way through the crowd of celebrating families and new graduates. He found the human with no medals standing quietly near the edge of the parade ground. Much as Kimnari had done the previous year, the young man noticed Vexstar's approach and immediately came to attention, rendering a perfect salute. "Cadet Zheng Te, sir," he said in response to Vexstar's return salute. Vexstar studied the young man's face, seeing the same calm confidence and depth of experience that he had. Noticed in Kimnari, there was something in his eyes that spoke of knowledge and responsibility far beyond his apparent age. Cadet Zheng, Vexstar said carefully, I could not help but notice that your uniform lacks any decorations. The familiar pause followed. The same hesitation that Vexstar now understood was the result of an operative choosing his words carefully to protect operational security, while still being truthful. Sir, I have completed all required training programs. Zheng Te replied, his voice steady and professional. But no academic honors? No training awards? Vexstar pressed. Knowing what answer he would receive but needing to hear it spoken, Zheng Te looked directly at him, and Vexstar saw the same flicker of recognition in his eyes that he had seen in Kimnari's. The young operative had clearly been briefed about Vexstar's clearance level and his knowledge of shadow operations. Sir, I have participated in various training exercises and programs, Zheng Te said slowly. However, the operations I have been involved in were not the kind that receive public recognition. The words were almost identical to what Kimnari had said a year earlier, and Vexstar realized they were probably part of a standard response that shadow operatives used when questioned about their lack of visible achievements. Because the operations were not public? Vexstar asked, completing the expected exchange. Yes, sir, Zheng Te confirmed, and Vexstar caught a slight hint of surprise in his voice. The young operative had clearly not expected a conventional officer to be familiar with the standard deflection phrase, but this time, instead of confusion and curiosity, Vexstar felt only understanding and respect. He looked at Zheng Te and saw not a cadet without achievements, but a veteran of operations that required more courage and sacrifice than most decorated officers would ever face. Cadet, Vexstar said quietly, I want you to know that some of us understand the significance of what that means. Zheng Te's expression remained neutral, but Vexstar could see a flash of recognition in his eyes. The young operative understood that he was speaking with someone who had been cleared to know about shadow operations. Thank you, sir, Zheng Te replied simply. As Vexstar prepared to move on, he paused for one final observation. Cadet, I hope you understand that serving without recognition requires a special kind of strength. The galaxy is safer because of people like you, even though it will never know your names. Sir, the work is its own reward, Zheng Te answered, and Vexstar heard the echo of Kimnari's words from their final conversation. Walking away from the graduation ceremony, Vexstar found himself thinking about the continuous nature of the sacrifice that shadow operatives made. Every year, new agents graduated and took on the burden of protecting the galaxy in secret. Every year, experienced operatives like Kimnari continued their work, carrying the weight of achievements that could never be acknowledged and losses that could never be publicly mourned. As he reached the edge of the parade ground, Vexstar paused to look back at the celebrating crowd. Families were embracing their newly graduated officers, proud of their children's achievements and excited about their future service. But scattered among them were other families, saying goodbye to sons and daughters whose real service would forever remain hidden, whose greatest achievements would never be celebrated, and whose sacrifices would never be publicly honored. Standing there in the fading afternoon light, Vexstar felt the full weight of the knowledge he carried. He knew about heroes who would never be named, about victories that would never be claimed, and about a system of protection that worked precisely because it remained invisible, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Vexstar understood that the galaxy's peace did not rest on the shoulders of decorated generals or celebrated admirals. It rested on the shoulders of people like Kimnari and Zheng Te, who accepted the burden of necessary invisibility, who served without recognition, and who protected billions of lives that would never know they had been in danger. The greatest strength of humanity, Vexstar realized, was not their courage in open battle or their skill in conventional warfare. It was their willingness to wage wars that history would never record, to achieve victories that others would claim, and to make sacrifices that would never be acknowledged, all in service of a peace that appeared to happen naturally, but was actually maintained through constant vigilance and selfless dedication. As he walked back toward his quarters, Commander Vextar understood that he had been forever changed by his encounter with the humans who wore no medals. He would never again see military service in the same way, and he would never again take galactic peace for granted. He knew now that the quiet moments between conflicts, the diplomatic successes that prevented wars, and the stability that allowed billions of people to live their lives in safety were not accidents of fortune or natural outcomes of goodwill. They were the carefully maintained products of a shadow war fought by heroes whose greatest honor was that they could never be honored, whose greatest victory was that their victories could never be claimed, and whose greatest service was that it would forever remain invisible to those they protected. In the end, Vextar realized the question he had asked about medals had led him to understand something far more important than military decorations or public recognition. It had led him to understand the true nature of service, sacrifice, and heroism in a galaxy where the greatest protectors were the ones who could never be named, and the most important battles were the ones that officially never happened.